Soccer Today is brought to you by Passion Soccer Boutique for the love of the beautiful game. Always open at passionsoccer.ca. You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today. Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. Duane, breaking news, kind of. There was rumors late last night that Callum Malice was traded to Seattle. And as far as we know now, Callum Malice was not in training for the Montreal Impact today, and he has been traded. That's as much as we know. But all signs do point towards Seattle. And that brings me a question. Lamar Nagel's back to Seattle. Montreal had a crowded midfield. That's why we were expecting a trade, and we were speculating 2 weeks ago, not even when the Piet watch was at its highest. We were speculating who would be the counterpart, who would leave Montreal, and we figured it would be Callum Malice. And apparently he's going to a very crowded midfield in Seattle too.
Yeah, this might be one of those mutual beneficial kind of deals that sometimes happens in sports leagues where you're helping each other out with a problem that they have. You know, when you have a player that you're not going to have room for and you don't want to have him discontented. Maybe Seattle wants a little more depth in there or something, who knows. But there might be some kind of mutual back scratching happening there. A lot of moves yesterday during the transfer window in MLS, more than I'm used to seeing at a deadline day. It almost had the feel of a traditional North American sport deadline day, almost even more action than you've seen lately in the NHL and things like that, where they have big, 12-hour specials. Maybe next year we'll have to have a 12-hour special.
Yeah, maybe not. We'll see. We'll start maybe with a half-hour special. How about that?
Yeah, fair enough. You don't want to do. Well, we tried that with the draft one day, and I don't know how well it worked, but we tried to have some fun with it anay. But yeah,
I remember
maybe
that
not
2 hours. That 2 hours was a long, long time. Like the last 20 minutes. Yeah. Those were the worst ones.
Yeah, so imagine the poor buggers that have to do it for real on ESPN and that when they're talking about guys that they, basically read a bio of for 10 minutes before the draft. But at any rate, no. In terms of Malice, I mean, do we know what's coming back in any way or any speculation right now?
I imagine it would be for some Tam and Gam. The Impact is now looking for international spots as we speak. They just traded one because they were expecting to sign Samuel Piet anyway. So you don't need an international spot to sign an international Canadian, right? So there's that aspect, and it's probably some money for next offseason.
It could be that or this conditional draft pick too.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the famous future compensations.
Yeah, which often results into nothing. Sometimes when you're doing that, you're just moving a player. And look, it's good. I'll say this: it's not actually a piece of business that you can have when you're talking about that sort of stuff, because you're helping that player out. You're getting him out of a situation where maybe he knows he's not going to play. Maybe there might be. In this particular case, it's not probably yet, but in some cases, you might have a person or something that's going on that you want to address. And by being when you're a team, you end up benefiting yourself down the road when a player is looking to sign to you. And I think that there are teams in MLS's history that haven't been very flexible in that way, that have held on to players against their will, tried to force players into situations that they weren't comfortable in or what have you, and it's ended up biting in the backside. And, I covered one for years here in Toronto, and then they changed their ways, and it's to their benefit. So as much as this is kind of a nothing trade from the Montreal perspective, I do think that if you look at it that way, you look at it as a sort of community service, so to speak, within the MLS community, then it's not the worst piece of business you could do.
Callum Malice will be best remembered for his time in Montreal for that infamous, no, not infamous, that famous assist on Cameron Porter's series clinching goal against Pachuca in the quarterfinals of the CONCACAF Champions League 2014-2015.
And now they're both gone.
Yep, and that happened last week as well. Cameron Porter suffered an injury, Duane, and is out for the rest of the season. Poor Cameron Porter cannot catch a break.
Yeah, at this point in time, 2 injuries, you have to wonder what the long-term feasibility of his career is. And that's unfortunate because there was a lot of excitement, but he'll always have that moment. And I don't even say that to be condescending. That is something that he will always hold on. It's more than you or I have when it comes to our sporting careers, right?
What other move surprised you yesterday in Major League Soccer? We had Areola was one of the big moves yesterday, going to DC. What are you expecting, or what are you surprised by?
I think DC's moves overall, and obviously FKC not landing their striker, that was a big surprise there as well. But I think DC, and I sort of spoke to this the other day, they almost seem like, I don't think that they believe that they can catch up this year. They probably understand they're too far behind, but I think that they're loading up with next year in line and with possibility of new stadiums and things like that. So it's kind of good that they're doing that, trying to get the house in order a little bit moving forward, and that there's a team like that that's willing to make those moves to push, for a stretch run, but more to the point for a run, next year that reflects how, tight the off seasons are becoming within Major League Soccer nowadays. Well, not so much in its playoffs, but still that you're able to sort of look long term. And I think that there's just, in terms of roster building, it used to be a little more fly by night. Now I think you're seeing more and more clubs planning in ways where they're able to go, okay, well, this is a move that might not help us, but we need to do it now so that we can be prepared and come to camp next year as a full team that we want to be, rather than scrambling to make those moves in January.
I think Columbus was thinking the same thing too during this window, Duane, selling a few assets. Biggest one, Ethan Finley going to Minnesota for Tam and Gam. And you do have the feeling that Columbus will not necessarily rebuild, but go a different direction in the offseason. And they're getting assets now to maybe get some value in the offseason. I'm talking about allocation money, Tam and Gam, and having a bit more space in the roster to move with.
Yeah, well, and I said this a few times in the last few weeks, that I think as we're seeing separation more so than we have in the past, I believe there's still a lot of parity in MLS, clearly, but there's more separation than we have in the past. I think that you are clearly, contending teams and non-contending teams more so than we've ever had in the last couple of years. And some teams like Columbus, if you're smart about that, to use a baseball analogy, you look at what the New York Yankees did last year and how they've set themselves up to be a contending team, especially for next year moving forward, but this year as well, just by simply dumping and getting a little younger and getting a little bit more focused in a different way. Last season, when they potentially could have been a borderline playoff team, then they made that decision. And I think Columbus might be doing something similar, and Columbus has to be creative because of the market they're in, and sort of by repositioning themselves now, they might be able to refocus next year and come back flying out of the gate, because I don't think that they're having the season that they thought they might at the start of the year, and then involves some tough decisions down the line occasionally when that happens, and they seem to be doing that. You look at the other side of the table, the teams that are pretty much looking like they're the contending teams didn't do a lot yesterday. Toronto FC didn't do anything. You didn't see a lot of move from clubs like NYCFC or Dallas or what have you. And I think that reflects the other side of that too, that if in Major League Soccer, if you feel that you have good chemistry and you're succeeding right now at the middle part of the season, or the 2/3 part of the season, not, shaking up the apple cart, so to speak, is maybe not the right way to go. And you don't need to make a move for a move's sake. And you're seeing that happen as well.
Speaking of move, a new designated player has been signed, and the first ever in LAFC's history, Duane. The team has a coach. Now the team has a DP, and they're kind of going the direction we kind of figured. Mexican national team player. No, it's not Chicharito yet, but Carlos Vela has been announced as the first ever DP for LAFC. And Chicharito has defended already the decision of Vela, who used to play for Real Sociedad in La Liga. Now will be playing in Major League Soccer for LAFC starting next year. And if, well, Mexican national team players still leaves the door open, maybe next year, next summer transfer window for Chicharito to come to LA as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how he does at West Ham. West Ham's a very interesting club, I think, in the Premier League there. I they have an outside shot to maybe compete for a UEFA spot. We'll see. Europa League spot is what I meant. UEFA Cup, I'm showing my age there. But at any rate, look, LAFC clearly was going to go the Mexican route. They kind of just went down the checklist, and this was the guy left standing. Quality player, quality DP signing, sort of speaks to that market, speaks to that city in a great way. I almost wonder in some ways the way LAFC seems to position itself, whether they might not have wanted to make a third jersey that's kind of the colors of the El Tri, because I think that's kind of where they're going to go with this.
Yeah, kind of a little bit of green, a little bit of white, a little bit of red, and a little bit of black for black and gold. Maybe that looks good together.
Yeah, we'll see. There's no surprise in that. The only, are they going to announce every signing, like when they, trade for some
with the guy looking down with the hat and just raising his head, and then you see, oh, that's who it is. Well, they announced Bradley that way, and they announced Vela that way. It'd just be fitting.
Yeah, it's going to become a meme, and TFC fans, every time they see an LAFC player with or person with their head tipped down, are going to go, please don't be bald, please don't be bald, please don't be bald.
Right. After their first loss, the amount of memes you'll see is just that, raising his hand and sits at Michael Jordan's face. Come on, somebody make this.
Yeah, no, it's already become, memeable. It's very memeable at this point.
Exactly. And that'll be interesting too, because LAFC is trying to make some wave early. The coach, player already signed. They're still like 6 months away from being a team. So that is actually bodes well. And I think it's another shot across the bow from LAFC towards the Galaxy. And that's kind of a interesting battle that will be interesting to watch in the market. But speaking of interesting to watch, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will take a quick overview of a few European leagues and what we are expecting, what we are hoping happens in the next few weeks.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back on Soccer Today, brought to you by Passion Soccer Boutique, for the love of the beautiful game. Always open at passionsoccer.ca. Duane, starting tomorrow afternoon, Premier League is back, and you were talking about West Ham and how they might have done right this time around in the window, which is not always the case for West Ham. What are other teams that you think got it right in the last transfer window in England?
Look, I think that Everton is a very interesting story this year in terms of some of the upgrades. It's not just Rooney either. They made some smart moves there to try and solidify themselves, spend some money to try and gap that up. And what's interesting is whether or not there's any chance you can close the gap from 7 to 6, because there really does seem to be, we used to talk about the big four. Nowadays, it's more of a big 6 at this point in time, more big 4 plus 2, or however you want to put it, because there is an extension of that, and Everton's kind of clearly on just the outside of that, and whether or not they could close that gap there. When you're talking about the clubs at the top, United made some moves. I sort of went at them the other day, and I don't like the moves completely. Matic is a move that might have some benefit for them. Clearly, we'll see whether Pogba in a different role can in a second year make a difference maker there. I'm not convinced by United. Liverpool, they're fighting off on Coutinho, fighting that off. I'm going to be watching that very closely over the next month or so. Reminds me a little bit, when you're talking about Liverpool, of the last year of Suarez, which of course was, the year that they nearly won the title, and if it wasn't for the slip, may very well have. So if they can hold on to Coutinho, who's a very important player for them, then maybe they are looking to make a run this year in a similar way that they did when they knew that they were going to eventually lose the player to a Barcelona, but they wanted to hold on for one more year. Clearly, from my own backyard in Manchester City's perspective, I think that they address some clear needs signed a goalie, signed a lot of defenders. Defense, and, the back, and particularly the fullbacks, wingbacks were a major problem last year. Pep likes to play with very aggressive fullback play, and he simply, that simply didn't exist last year. Yeah, so you just didn't have fullbacks that could play the way Pep wanted to play, and it really showed, and it really was harmful to their success. They appear to have addressed that this year. And, the other interesting thing really is the Stan Pat team, the team that has had the most points in the Premier League over the past 2 seasons combined, and Spurs not really have done anything. And in fact, lost a few players here and there. And,
they've done it the Spurs way, no? They never changed their course as a philosophy. They always stay in, look, we'll bring our up and coming players and they'll become superstars here. And eventually we'll sell them. And with that money, we'll better our stadium, better our infrastructures, and continue to grow as a club to not just be a one-off, but to be consistently now in that top 6, like you mentioned. And it is the case. It'll be an interesting season for West Ham, not being at White Hart Lane, being at Wembley for the season. It will be different. It's a transition in infrastructures, but it is almost a transition on the pitch too. Will Spurs be able to keep a Harry Kane next year? A young upstart Dele Alli will continue to establish himself as one of the best young English players. So you do have a lot of what if in a year or two down the road, and Pochettino does it the Spurs way, continues bringing young players and not necessarily bringing the biggest of transfers, but some pieces here and there. But transition period, I wouldn't be surprised if fans are a little disappointed at the end of the year about the Spurs.
Well, particularly when you look at the record at Wembley last year and their inability to sort of adjust to the different playing surface there and the larger field, which is really a major factor. They lobbied Wembley to change their dimensions or I think it was the FA that they lobbied regardless, so they could change the dimensions of Wembley to match that of White Hart Lane. Obviously, they're making the new one right now, and it will probably replicate the exact same pitch sizes they're used to for years and years and years, and the FA shot them down. So that's going to be a challenge for a group of players that, and a style and a tactics that have been, put in place to be successful at home over the years, and they're not going to have that next year. And I think that's something that we're going to watch out for a lot, whether they take a step back. They really, it is so Spursy to use that old cliche term that they do have the most points in the Premier League over the last 2 years and did win the title in the year.
Yeah, and not even close when you're looking at like last year. On paper, they were kind of close, but not really. Speaking of the champions, Chelsea lost a few pieces, not necessarily making big waves, but continuing to build that team aspect. And if you go back 12 months ago, we were talking about how the Premier League is this year the league of the manager. It's all the best managers against themselves, and we'll see what happens. This year, for me, like the theme so far, and I think the theme that will be present this year is complete. You need to have a complete team to be successful day in, day out in the Premier League, and I think that will be very true this year. Sometimes you had to be complete, but last year, Chelsea was lucky enough to not have European play and not have those extra fixtures in their calendar. It was able to focus solely on being successful in the league, and that will be different this year. And that's why I think you'll need to have a complete team, very deep roster, to be able to win the league this year.
Well, that is, the last 2 title holders. And you go back to Liverpool's near title 3 years ago as well. Was it 3 years ago? 2014, 4 years ago now. But you go back and you look at that as well, and you realize that there is this continued sort of habit, reality where these teams are competing at the, to win titles without having European football in their mix. I'm trying to remember whether Chelsea had it in 2015 or not.
They won the Europa League. So you remember they won the Champions League, they won the Europa League the year after, and they won again. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so for precise, okay, so that's the exception to that. And before that, it was pretty consistent that the champion was competing in Europe as well, as you would expect. But over the last 2 years, is that too small of a sample size? Leicester is a kind of a unique situation, and I think that there was just a lot of circumstances happening that year that allowed the perfect storm to occur. But there is something to watch there, and Chelsea will, of course, have the Champions League. Not only will they have the Champions League, they'll be focusing on it. You would have to think that is a priority of the club. They haven't won it in the past, made it a priority in the past. They probably don't like being in it. So So I look at, if you want to go outside the box a little bit, and Wenger is already on record saying he plans to rotate his squad in the Europa League. Could this be the year with some parity there? And when we least expected, when you take, maybe Europe kind of off the table for them, that Arsenal could step up and maybe challenge for a title. I don't like myself even. I don't like hearing what I'm saying.
I know, but Sanchez not being there for the early part, still getting fit and all that situation, and basically Arsene Wenger putting his foot down and saying, no, Ozil and Sanchez will be part of my plan going forward. We'll see how it unfolds, but we'll see how Lacazette turns out too. That's a big signing, and it's that too. The season of crazy, it's the off season of crazy signing for me. It's like almost not sustainable, the amount of money spent on sometimes fringe players for Steam, and it's like in the 30s of million euros, and it's like crazy for me. We'll see how all those signings pan out.
Yeah, well, Walker. I mean, that's the one most people are going to point to, but. And City has the money, and it's the TV money. You look even down the pyramid. Like you go down to teams in the Championship, even League One. You're talking about, especially the kind of the lower level, your Stokes, your West Broms, your clubs in that sort of tier. They're all making record signings. It's all in context to the size of their club, but there's just so much money in the system right now, and it's only going to increase further. So, we better get used to this. Modern football is here to stay when it comes to the money spending. I mean, outside of some kind of massive correction in the market, which, could take place. But right now it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And it doesn't seem like, UEFA has the backbone to really try and put a truly impactful financial fair play measure in mind that would get through and match the politics across the board to get passed and get enforced in a real way. And it goes obviously beyond England shores too when you look at PSG spending and obviously the Liga teams, the two big ones they're always spend. So just a lot of money floating around, and it's going to be an interesting season. Milan too. We haven't talked about Italy. We don't talk about Italy a lot on this show, and maybe we should this year, but the spending that they did in the offseason they have has really made them a really intriguing team if you want to look outside the shores of England as well.
No, for sure. And we have to wrap the show pretty soon, but we'll talk about it in more details tomorrow. You mentioned La Liga. Yes, it'll be Real Madrid and then Barcelona. Madrid has a type of team that could be maybe questionably the best ever assembled. But I want to mention PSG for a second. And how many points clear will they win the league or championship by? 30, 35, 40 with Neymar, maybe?
It really depends on whether Monaco has a sustainable sort of system in place that allows them to churn more and more young, talented players out in the way that they did last year. Was that a one-off and anomaly? That great team that they produced that was mostly, internally produced and young and or at least bought at a young age with the idea of selling on. That is going to be their model clearly, and if they can continue like Ajax had done for years and sort of slipped off for a little while before they seem to be doing it again, if they can produce that kind of system, Dortmund in a way kind of does that on a higher level, then maybe it won't be as free and clear as we're looking at. But yeah, I would have to say PSG will comfortably be champions. Not quite Celtic, but not something a little bit more than what you're going to see it in other similar leagues.
No, for sure. And it'll be interesting to me to see how Neymar adapts, how quickly they can become a powerhouse, and if they can gel in time to be successful this year in the Champions League, or if it's going to take like a year or two of adaptation period to be able to rival a Real Madrid, because that's what you're looking at. It's not just beating Barcelona, it's finding a way to beat Real Madrid too, because, well, I think it's the type of generational team that we rarely see. Yeah,
and we shouldn't ignore Spain. We haven't talked about Atleti in any real way, and we always forget them, but this is a club that has gone to deep in the Champions League consistently over the last 3 or 4 years. So when we're talking about the best in Europe, we should include them as well. And the question there, new stadium this year, so that'll be interesting to see whether they can have the same sort of dominance there that they did on, or whether the bubble is going to finally burst there, because there's always people always sort of assume that it's a short-term thing that's happening with Athletic, but another interesting team to watch as always. As long as the coach is there, then they're going to be a team to reckon with, I think.
As long as Simeone stays, maybe they stay a powerhouse. All right, you can follow Duane on Twitter as always at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. Thanks to Passion Soccer Boutique, available at Vaudreuil, Laval, Saint-Léonard, and of course everywhere at passionsoccer.ca for the love of the beautiful game. Until tomorrow, as always, I'm Kevin Laramee, and have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.